Bill Newton Dunn, the illicit trade in tobacco is by definition something going on under the radar. But do we have a picture of how big the problem is?
It's absolutely enormous, and luckily the tobacco companies, all the tobacco companies together, are monitoring this very closely, and their estimate that last year 10 billion euros were lost as revenue to the national governments because of the illicit smuggling. It's very big. They do this partly by picking up the discarded packets left at football grounds by the supporters after they've left the match. And by picking up the discarded packets, you can tell which ones are fake and which are genuine packets, and that gives them a measurement of the scale of the problem and how many are being brought in. And 10 billion euros is an awful lot of money that the governments are losing each year, which they could use very usefully, of course.
And that's an awful lot of money at a time when our own government is cutting spending in the East Midlands as elsewhere.
Absolutely. Our government, unfortunately, like many other governments across Europe, is in deep deficit. That's why we're seeing the cuts, and it seems to be unavoidable. They've got to save money somehow, but they could save an awful lot more money by fighting the smuggling going on and bringing in this legitimate revenue. And of course, everything that's smuggled in is destroying a legitimate job which should be used for making or trading inside the East Midlands or the UK.
And do you have a feeling of the scale of the problem in the East Midlands specifically? I believe there has been at least one very large case of this happening.
I haven't seen figures precisely for our region, but there was a big case just before Christmas where I'm told a record haul of 300,000 cigarettes were discovered coming off a plane at East Midlands Airport, apparently from Tenerife, I think, and they would have been resold, and that would have destroyed other people who were genuinely trying to sell their cigarettes. So we don't know the total scale of the problem. You could perhaps extrapolate it or reduce it pro rata for the 10 billion as a whole for Europe, but it's a lot of money, and it's a loss to us in terms of money and jobs, and we ought to be doing something about it.
You say we ought to be doing something about it. You've been involved with the launch here at the European Parliament of a booklet looking at how to do just that. What are the key recommendations?
Well, there are two things we can do. We can fight the thing at European level. There's an agency called OLAF which fights fraud against the EU budget, but also what we need is joined up policing by the police forces inside the UK who treat each other across county borders as alien, and we don't know much about them, and across Europe as a whole. There's an awful lot that could be done to fight this, which isn't being done at the moment.
And I believe that you would like to see a European FBI. Why would that help, do you think?
Because an FBI, which is what the FBI does in America, works across borders. At the moment, all our police are working very hard, but they can't cross the borders. They can go to the border limit, the county boundary, the national boundary, and then they have to say, oh, sorry, we've got to stop here. And the bad guys can go wherever they like, of course, and get away. So we need a police force that can fight the bad guys on the same cross-border scale as the criminals, and it's not happening yet.
And not happening perhaps because many countries are not in favour of it. Is that the case?
It's not so much they're not in favour. If you talk to ministers privately, they say, well, I can see the argument, but we're afraid of what the public might say, because logically, if we had an FBI for Europe, it would have different nationalities in the force, and some of our tabloid newspapers in the UK might well say, does this mean Germans in uniforms arresting people in the UK? And didn't we fight World War II to stop that? Well, yes, we did, but that was 65 years ago. The Germans are good guys now, and they're actually rather good policemen too, may I say. And that we would have Brits in uniforms in Germany and France. It's an inevitable step forward. If we've got international trade, a globalizing world, we need to fight the bad guys on the same scale. It's coming. Unfortunately, it won't happen until, in my view, there is a big shock to the system. The bad guys do something so horrific, like 9/11, that the public says, oh, how did that happen? Why was nobody doing anything to stop it beforehand? Just as we see in referenda, the public doesn't want to make changes unless there's a shock. A case has been made for change, and at the moment nobody, except perhaps me, is making a case saying we need to change, we need an FBI, because the scale of the bad guys, their activities is growing and growing year by year.
And what's Britain's stance on the idea of a European FBI?
They say the public doesn't like the idea of foreigners in uniforms in Britain. They'd say we don't trust foreigners to share our police intelligence. If you get a tip-off of some bit of information, I would say to you, well, how good is that bit of information you give me? Where do you get the source from? How can I test if it's any good? And you'll say, well, I can't reveal the source. That's secret. And so the communication between governments breaks down and they don't trust each other. And so everybody's afraid to move. And it'll only be this horrific shock one day, a new drug like ecstasy killing teenagers all across Europe in one night in nightclubs, something like that, or our bank accounts being hacked and the money disappearing goodness knows where, and then we'll all be shocked and say, do something about it. I'm trying to campaign to say, let's take action, let's build an FBI before the bad thing happens, rather than waiting to happen first.